first goes in from Sheringham, I think, oh, shit. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. I've got extra time. I'll be able to... Oh, bloody hell, Solskjaer scored. Just about, I'm kind of sitting there with my eyes shut thinking, I've got about 2 minutes to rewrite this. What am I going to say? What I hadn't noticed was the pissed up bloke in the... had spotted that he was right by the press box. And he came down the steps punching the laptops of each journalist in turn going, oh, what are you bastards going to write now? So I hadn't noticed it. I hadn't seen him coming. Suddenly my laptop spinning to the ground with a great big crack across it.
Hello and welcome to When Football Began Again, the podcast that takes a look at the Premier League era through rose-tinted spectacles and tries to remember the good times we shared. Today's show is a Deserted Island Matches special with author, broadcaster and journalist Jim White. Jim shares his matches that he would take to a desert island with him, with a bit of a Manchester United theme, also games that he has worked over the years. That is coming up very shortly. Before then, though, thank you to everybody joining the show after our episode with Jason Lee last week. A fascinating conversation with Jason. I really enjoyed speaking to him. What a lovely, lovely guy who really went through the mill in the 90s with what he was put through, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think he articulates that so well. If you haven't listened to that yet, please do make sure you go back and have a listen to that episode. It is a fascinating journey that he went on as a professional footballer. But on to today's show with Jim. Now, this was recorded actually at the back end of last season. I have sat on this one a little bit longer than is ideal. I do apologise about that. There was a slightly elongated break that I wasn't quite planning for over the winter months. However, most of it still really stands up. I mean, first things first, he's a Manchester United fan. We recorded this just before Manchester City had won the treble. So that is reference that actually at the time of recording, Manchester United were the only side to have done the treble. He does make some predictions around Erik ten Hag being the man for Manchester United long term. I think the jury's still out on that, but he also makes some really good kind of observations around what needed to happen with Manchester United's ownership. And I think that is probably beginning to happen as well. He's great value, a really great guest. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed chatting to him. So here we go. This is Deserted Island Matches with Jim White. Joining me today to discuss his Deserted Island Matches is author, columnist for The Telegraph and broadcaster Jim White. Jim, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
I'm very well, Carl. I'm really delighted to be doing this. I've enjoyed the preparations. You may not enjoy what I have to say, but I have really enjoyed the preparations. Great format. Love it.
Well, I'm really pleased to get you on, and I'm a huge fan of your work, and we're going to cover a little bit of that as we go along. Before we get on to your Deserted Island picks, you're a Manchester United fan. So what are your earliest memories of Manchester United, and how did they become the team for you?
I notice you have got video, so there's no disguising how old I am about this. But basically, my first memories of playing football were in the playground at school in South Manchester. I actually come from Altrincham, which any Mancunian will tell you is the posh part. I can only apologise for that. And I remember playing in the playground in 1968, playing football, and you had the choice of the European champions or the league champions. City were league champions, United were the European champions. So obviously I went for glory boy, obviously. And Dennis Law's celebration, holding his shirt cuff, was a big thing in the playground. And, you know, it went from there. And I think my mum fancied George Best because she was always asking me about George Best, what we're doing. And I don't know if you know, but George Best built this kind of goldfish bowl house in the suburbs in Bramhall. And we were actually, he moaned and groaned about people turning up to look at it. We were one of the families that turned up to have a look at George Best's house. We drove over there. My dad parked outside and we looked at George Best's house. He wasn't there. I think he only slept there about 5 nights because he was fed up of people parking outside looking in through the windows. The thing was, when I was getting a bit older, my dad used to take me to watch Altrincham. We used to go every game. And when I was getting older, obviously going to school and stuff, people were saying, United or City, and go and watch United or City. But it was, my mum and dad were quite nervous about it because it was the start of kind of intense football hooliganism. And I remember I went to, my mum's not around anymore, so I can say this on the record. I actually lied to my mum about where I was going the first time I went to United. I told her I was going out round to a friend's house, and we actually went to Old Trafford and watched United against Sunderland.
So that was your first game, right? And,
yeah.
And as we're going to cover during this conversation today, the way that football changed as we got into that modern era in terms of just feeling safe, actually, children, young people, families being able to go to the matches.
Yes, indeed. Although I have to say, Carl, one of the reasons I was so intoxicated by it was the sense of menace. I remember standing on the corner of the Stretford end. It was a place called the Stretford Paddock, and just watching the fans rolling down. I wasn't brave enough to go in amongst them. Obviously, I was only about 12, but watching them rolling down the terrace and chanting at the rivals and so on. And it was that part of the fan culture that I really got into. Obviously, I wasn't a hooligan in any sense, but I enjoyed the kind of peripheral of it.
Before we start with your Deserted Island picks, there's so much I want to cover with you today. Let's start by looking at the beginnings of your career as a football writer. How did you get started? When did you know that this was going to be the career for you?
Oh, I always wanted to be a journalist. When I was in my teens, there was a guy called Tony Wilson, famous for Factory Records, who was the presenter of the local news, and he was my absolute hero. And when I was in the sixth form at school, I was running the sixth form society, and I got Tony Wilson to come in and address us, and I badgered him about how I got onto TV and all that kind of thing. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be Tony Wilson. Clearly didn't have any of his talent, but his interests were exactly mine. So it was pop music and football, and any way in which you could cover those was what I wanted to do. And went to university and spent my entire time writing stuff, working for the university newspaper and so on. I'd been sports editor of the school newspaper as well, so that was a kind of hint as to where I was going. There was never any doubt in my mind that that's what I was going to do, where I was going to go. But of course, you've got to be lucky. You've got to be bloody lucky. And I met the right people and got in. And I worked on a local paper in South London. I got a job straight from university there. Got my qualifications, got my NUJ, all those kind of things that you needed in those days. And then got lucky because the guy I was working under got a job at The Independent, and he got me in at The Independent when it first started. So I was there when The Independent launched in '86. Again, giving a bit about my age there, and I was there at the launch in '86, and the editor Andres Hutton-Smith was a fantastic guy who basically encouraged young talent to do whatever they wanted, and what I wanted to do was write about football. So I managed to do that, and it was great. It was an education and brilliant. I remember my first game I ever covered as a reporter was QPR against Chelsea. God, I can't remember the year, but it was in the '80s anyway. And I remember sitting next to the bloke from the News of the World and just being in awe of him on the phone, because in those days you had to go to copy takers, and he was extemporizing. He hadn't written anything down. He was just making it up. And he'd obviously been told, you've got 800 words or whatever, and he could somehow know in his mind exactly what 800 words were. I just sort of, and then I suddenly realized, oh shit, I've got to write something now as well.
Wow. It's time for the first match of your Deserted Island picks. Now, this is a Premier League game you take with you featuring Manchester United. What match have you gone for?
Well, February the 12th, 2011. and it's United against City. And I went with my sons. I got them tickets to Old Trafford. So the three of us went, and we were all in the Stretford end watching it. And 2011 was when City were what Alex Ferguson called the noisy neighbours. They'd been bought by Sheikh Mansour. Money was being put in, but in a way they hadn't got the plan together yet. They hadn't really got it together, but they were a threat. In a way they hadn't been. So when I was growing up, City and United were equal when I was a kid, and then United just went into ascendance, and City were you never even thought about them, and suddenly they were breathing down United's neck. And the big thing was they bought Carlos Tevez from United. Carlos Tevez, who had won the Champions League with United in 2008, went across to City, who infuriated Ferguson by putting a picture of him up in the centre of town saying, "Welcome to Manchester." And you were beginning to think these guys are serious. This is important. And it was a tense game. And my sons were, let's think, they were teenagers. Maybe my younger son may not even have been a teenager. So they were still enthralled and excited. And it was a tense game. And then Nani got the ball crossed, and Wayne Rooney did that unbelievable overhead bicycle kick, hammered it into the corner, and we just leapt, the three of us hugging each other. So it was an emotional moment. He did that fantastic goal celebration, that kind of arrogant look at me goal celebration, standing in front of the City fans, and it was a great moment. It was probably about the last one that I ever celebrated for over City.
I mean, that period of Wayne Rooney's career, I mean, when you actually go back and watch him as a teenager still, when he joins Man United, and he's just he's got that bullish energy, but he's still so sharp, there's still pace. And then by this point, by the time it gets to this match that we're talking about here, he's around the peak player, isn't he? I seem to remember that being almost the peak of his powers.
I think you're right. He'd had a very disappointing World Cup in 2010 in South Africa, if you remember. He was prone to injury. He's also, his lifestyle, he was a contemporary of Ronaldo, whose lifestyle was all about, looking at himself in the mirror and seeing how many muscles he had on his six-pack these days. Whereas Rooney, would go to seed in the summer. He'd come back 2 stone overweight after his holidays and that kind of thing. But he had such guile, such game intelligence. And he was beginning to rely on that more than anything else. But what was so magnificent about that goal was it had all that athleticism, all that power that reminded you of that Wayne Rooney of 2003 when Clive Tilsley had that, remember the name when he scored against Arsenal for Everton, and then his amazing performance at the 2004 Euros when you thought he was going to be the greatest player in the world. And he had issues, he had problems, he had fitness issues, and it was almost, you're right, it was almost the kind of moment of nostalgia for those wonderful suggestions of his powers.
Glimpses of magic all the way through his career. So it's 10 years since your book, Premier League, A History in 10 Matches, was published. Those early seasons are, of course, defined by the rise of Manchester United, the brief interruption of Blackburn Rovers, and the steady stream of iconic overseas talent that arrived on these shores, not least Eric Cantona. And these are all covered in those first few chapters of your book. Why were Manchester United so dominant in those early years of the Premier League after quite a barren spell? And did Blackburn's triumph kind of give the rest of the league that glimmer of hope that you could penetrate this fantastic Manchester United team?
Yeah, I think that there's one particular reason why United were in the ascendant, and that's they had the greatest manager in their history at that time. And Ferguson had taken his time. I wonder whether he would have got to where he did in today's climate. It took him well over, it took him 3.5 seasons to win a trophy. I very much doubt a manager would get that long now. Certainly not at Manchester United. But by then he really knew what he was doing. He'd assembled a great side. He was there and ready. And the management at Manchester United also were very shrewd at that time in exploiting the moment commercially. They started this kind of rolling commercialization of the game, which had infuriated so many people, not least amongst the United fans themselves, but fans of other clubs found them a kind of ugly commercial corporate monolith. And they did very shrewd things like increasing the capacity at Old Trafford remorselessly. They bought all the surrounding area. Old Trafford was built in what was an industrial zone. As the industry kind of fell away around it, United bought up all the area and so on. So they could construct stands that could bring in more people, and it became a kind of benevolent cycle for United, a vicious cycle for everyone else. The more they won, the richer they got. And in a sense, Blackburn was a wonderful romantic possibility. I mean, you look at how much Jack Walker put into Blackburn now, and it looks paltry. Nowadays it would barely pay for a Premier League squad's annual car valeting service. What was it? He spent about 250 million, but then it seemed ginormous amounts, and he was very clever as well. He brought in a manager who was hungry, and Kenny Dalglish, who assembled some great players, the Sutton Shearer attacking force. The problem Blackburn had was Jack Walker was satisfied when he won that title, and things began to go off the boil thereafter. Ferguson was never satisfied. Ferguson wanted more. What he did last year was in history. What he was interested in was the future, and that mindset was really significant in the way that Blackburn couldn't kick on.
A ruthless and highly talented manager, and that commercial mix, as you mentioned, the perfect combination, I think, for Manchester United to really step in and push on. The second game for your deserted island is a non-Premier League Manchester United game you can take with you. So it can be a league game before the Premier League, a cup game. What have you gone for?
These are all matches that I've seen, Carl. So they've all got seen live. I mean, obviously, virtually every United game is on the telly. But these games I've seen live. So I'm going to go for the FA Cup semi-final in 1999. I think that was a really huge game for United because it was against Arsenal, who were fantastic in those days under Arsene Wenger. They've been completely revamped. He brought in new methodologies. Ferguson was constantly having to play catch up in his approaches, and Wenger brought in such fantastic players: Thierry Henry, Dennis Bergkamp. Actually, I'll rewind there. Bruce Rioch had bought Dennis Bergkamp, but Wenger made him a better player. And they were fantastic. And this head-to-head rivalry inspired both of them. The managers were determined to better the other one all the time. In the 99 Cup Cup semi-final, they met. And it was a great game, a fantastic game, ebbed and flowed. And I thought it was all over when Arsenal it was, I think, 1-1. Arsenal got a penalty in the last dying embers of the game. Dennis Bergkamp stepped up. I obviously, as you do when the opposition take a penalty, put my head in my hands and couldn't believe it when everyone around me was leaping up and down because Schmeichel saved it. And then in extra time, probably the greatest goal I've seen live, Ryan Giggs scored it, just dancing through the Arsenal defense and scored, took his shirt off, his hairy chest. It was a great moment. Actually, I tell you, a goal to match it was one I saw in the Copa del Rey final between Real Madrid and Barcelona, when Gareth Bale scored a goal from the halfway line, where you with your affiliations will remember this one, where he basically, outpaced the defender, but he also took a kind of diversion almost into the stands to run round the guy. That was an incredible goal. But I think Giggs is just about to. We can't mention Ryan Giggs these days, obviously, because he's been cancelled. But it was a great goal.
On the other point as well, because I believe as well, Schmeichel had announced his retirement, so you knew that you were seeing the final days of Peter Schmeichel in a Man United shirt at that time, and for him to make that save that effectively kept the treble alive. I mean, this is, I think, sometimes where football just creates the most incredible storylines, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, United had developed this kind of intense resolve that they weren't going to be beaten. I think that came from Ferguson, and that season they put it into action. Solskjaer scoring the winner in the cup tie against Liverpool at Old Trafford in added time was a kind of harbinger of what was going to happen in the Camp Nou, and that resolve, that determination, that refusal to die was there with Schmeichel. Not just scoring goals in the last minute, but stopping goals in the last minute.
Incredible, and we'll come on to more of those exploits of that team a little bit later. But coming back to your book, and actually Man United's dominance continues throughout the 90s, culminating in an unprecedented treble, at least an unprecedented treble at the time of recording. Then Arsenal and Chelsea begin to punctuate their success a little more frequently. If the early to mid 90s was all about overseas players kind of changing the game, the latter part of the decade and into the millennium, there are, in particular, two overseas coaches who make a real impact in Arsene Wenger and Jose Mourinho. What did they do to the Premier League? What difference did they make?
I think they made it the centre of the world, and thus, gave it a projection around the globe. Mourinho, who it's hard to reconcile that nasty, grumpy sod he's become with how glamorous he was at the time. When he first took over at Chelsea, wow, there was this good-looking, sophisticated, brilliant linguist, and also a great tactician in charge. And what it became is we weren't just getting the best players, we were getting the best minds. So the tactical battles became much more interesting, and so on. The Premier League is Britain's greatest cultural asset. It's exported around the globe. It gives us a kind of resonance and a power that is almost incalculable. Obviously Harry Potter's pretty big. Obviously the Beatles were pretty big. All those things. But the Premier League is the one now that really gives us meaning around the globe. And in a sense, they were lucky in that it was an English language based product. So for television, it could go around the world because English tends to be everybody's second language, if not their first. But I think it also attracted people who wanted to position themselves within it. Roman Abramovich being the first super rich owner to come in. And, Abramovich brought in Mourinho because he had the money to do so. And those early days of the 2000s, you were really beginning to see that kind of global power that the Premier League now is.
Mm. And obviously you had lots of access during your career, during his career in Sir Alex Ferguson, that actually Sir Alex Ferguson took that challenge and he again revitalized his teams, didn't he? He again kind of changed things around and rose back to the top after a few years where Arsenal and Chelsea really came.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the United had obviously the treble in '99, and then there was a bit of a dip with both Arsenal and Arsenal Invincibles. Then Chelsea didn't win the league for 3 seasons, and then Ferguson really regrouped and built what I think was his finest team, which is the one that won the 2008 Champions League final. I think that was his best team, where he had Ronaldo, Rooney, Tevez up front. He had Hargreaves, Scholes, Giggs in midfield, Carrick coming through, and then that really defiant defence of Vidic and Ferdinand and Van der Sar behind them. That I think that was his greatest moment. People say his first title-winning team was pretty good. Obviously, the treble team was pretty good, but that I think was the one. And building up to that through then, what Ferguson did was he went with the times. He wasn't an old dinosaur in any way. He brought in what was the best of the new approaches, new ways, things like diets and so on. Always had an eye to innovation. And I think always made sure that he had at his side a real tactical innovator. So the last guy he had, Rennie Mullenstein, was a guy whose reading of the game was Fergie's reading of the game was good, but guys who could, on the training ground, really put ideas into action. And it's incredible, really, that he lasted as long as he did at the top. I mean, Roy Hodgson's outlasted him in terms of the longevity of his career. But Ferguson was at the top for so long in that time. That's the remarkable thing. And he couldn't do that by standing still. He couldn't do that by saying my way or the highway. He could only do it by adapting and looking at Jose Mourinho and going thinking, I'm going to have some of that. I'm going to get some of that. Looking at Arsene Wenger and saying, well, what's he doing right? He was a very inquisitive man, Ferguson, and I think that really helped.
So the third match for your deserted island is your favourite Premier League game that doesn't involve Man United that you'd relive again and again. Which classic 90 minutes would you go for?
I've gone for a slightly odd one, I think, but it was just fantastic to be there. What a game this was. Brentford 3, Liverpool 3 in September 21. Liverpool were going to go on that season to go for the quadruple. They were within 2 games of winning the quadruple. Don't forget that. The last game of the Premier League season, having won the Cup and the League Cup, they were still in there until final minutes, and then the Champions League. So they came very, very close. And that side was bettered on the day by Brentford. And what's brilliant about Brentford is that they show that you don't need a huge financial backer to do well in the Premier League. That what you need is cleverness, innovation, and smart dealing, and you'll do it. And I think that's what's so great about the Premier League. I've seen Brentford, bizarrely, that 3-3 draw, what a game it was, against Liverpool. I've seen them absolutely murder Man United 4-0. And I've seen them beat Manchester City. So on their day, as is true of any team in the Premier League, on their day, they can match the very best. Now, obviously, the competitiveness of the Premier League, you have to put into context that Man City have won it by dint of financial doping for the last 5 of the last 6 years. So you could say, well, why is that different from Paris Saint-Germain in the French league or Barcelona and Real Madrid or Bayern Munich? What's so different? Why is the Premier League competitive? Because on the day, Brentford could do that to Liverpool. And Brentford, a tiny little club. I think I'm right in saying their annual wage bill is 1/10 of Man United's. That shows you the difference. And the conventional wisdom is the more you pay in wages, the better you do. And yet Brentford are kind of completely undermining that theory by playing really clever football, really smart, great manager, brilliant recruitment. And that game was just, in a sense, it typified what's so good about the Premier League. And Brentford aren't the only ones. Brighton are doing it, Fulham are doing it. It's great to see.
Yeah, all of those teams really well run. And what does make the Premier League special, as you say, any team can beat any team on their day. So coming back to the latter chapters of your book, the Premier League juggernaut continues into the 2000s. The gap between the haves and have-nots does only seem to widen. Leeds United, the last English champions before that Premier League era, do briefly flirt with a return to the upper echelons as they reach the lucrative Champions League semi-finals, but are relegated towards near oblivion a few years later. Everton briefly interrupt the top four of Manchester United, Arsenal, Chelsea and Liverpool that inhabit the Champions League qualification spots for 5 years out of 6 between 03 and 09. It does seem that the same 4 teams are going to dominate the league for years to come. Then comes that huge investment at Manchester City, as you mentioned, and a brief interlude of stability at Tottenham. And suddenly their head-to-head meeting in May 2010 provides an alternative cup final of sorts as the two teams attempt to break into the Champions League. Now, there are conflicting opinions on the Champions League format, but is this a vital new narrative and also a glimmer of hope for the rest of the league during a period when it did seem that 4 teams are going to dominate the league forevermore?
It does, because of the revenue involved. You get in the Champions League and you're guaranteed an additional 30, 40 million just if you get in the group stage, never mind if you progress further. And so that makes a huge difference. And Tottenham were, they had that flirtation under Harry Redknapp when they played. They had such a great side. And then when Pochettino came in and they had the new stadium, the new training ground, they looked as though they got it all right. It hasn't worked out like that, partly because they sacked people at the wrong time, employed the wrong people, that made a real mess of what looked like a very clever formula. But the real difference has been the fact that Middle Eastern money has started to come into the English game, and the reasons are fairly obvious. That in order to move their economies away from dependency on oil, which they realize is going to run out eventually, what those governments are doing is investing in sport as a way of doing it. So in Saudi, you see Formula One, you see boxing, you see tennis, golf in Saudi as well with the Live Tour. And one of the best ways of doing that is to invest in a Premier League club, because the Premier League is the international brand. There's this term sports washing that goes on with it, in that what they're looking to do is kind of put their international reputation into the laundrette of football. But I think it's subtler than that. I think it's about power rather than about reputation. I think they want to be international power brokers. That's how they see themselves economically in the future. And so first City were the ones. And initially when City were bought, it was a bit like a kind of, I suppose it was a bit like a kind of Twitter transfer junkie getting hold of them. It was just, we'll buy Robinho, we'll buy this, that and the other. But then they got sensible people in. They got the guys from Barcelona, they got Guardiola, and it's been ridiculous, the transformation there. And now we've got the same at Newcastle with Saudi money coming in, and again they followed that City methodology. So it's not supermarket sweep of big name players. It's getting a good manager in, buying shrewdly, and now they've broken into the Champions League spots. And I think that is the way forward. And obviously Manchester United, we don't know who they're going to be sold to, if they're going to be sold at all, but one of the potential buyers is Qatar. So you've got the 3 big Gulf states all wanting to get involved in football and all going down the same route. And I think that kind of super ownership means that the Premier League has 2 compartments. Well, maybe 3. It has the super ownership at the top. And Manchester United and Liverpool are slightly different because they've got the fan base to give them the revenue. Then you've got the clever, smart, well-run clubs in the kind of marzipan layer. And then you've got a kind of frantic, desperate bunch of clubs trying not to get relegated down the bottom. And it's kind of made it a 3-tier system. And in a sense, we talked about Blackburn earlier. They broke into that. Now to break into it, you can't even be a billionaire. You've got to be a super rich state to get into that top 4 now. It's just extraordinary. Liverpool have done it by shrewd management at the top and also by having a very, very good manager on the pitch.
But as you say, as we talked about Manchester United's rise in the early 90s and all of those formulas being correct, now there has to be that huge investment. That has to be one of the ingredients at a level that, as you say, unless it is one of these super owners, doesn't seem that possible. I mean, is that sort of an existential threat for the Premier League's competitive nature?
You see, they always say, oh, yeah, but Leicester did it. Yeah, but you look at Leicester, actually, Leicester had a lot of money behind them. The Thai owners were really, really putting money. All went horribly wrong this season when they went down. They went down having in Premier League history, no club had a bigger wage bill or has spent more money on transfers than Leicester. So Leicester did it. Yeah, they were shrewd. Yeah, they took advantage of the fact that several of the top six were going through periods of readjustment and they could slip in there. But don't pretend that they weren't financed. They were. They had money behind them.
Makes for kind of, I suppose, intriguing and worrying times ahead for the Premier League. So coming back to your match choices, the fourth match for you to choose is a European match you'd relive again and again. I have a feeling I know which one might be your favorite.
I don't think we don't need to linger along on this one. But let me tell you about what happened. It's the Camp Nou in 25th of May 1999. Manchester United playing Bayern Munich. I'm working for The Guardian and I've got to do the front page piece for the front of the newspaper about it. And I had to deliver my copy on the final whistle. Okay. And to my side, to my left, are the corporate hospitality seats. And clearly there's a lad who's bought a ticket in the middle of it who is out of his head, pissed, United fan, getting angrier and angrier as United look to be losing. I've written my piece. It's the treble is a step too far. Ferguson picked the wrong team. We'll never see the treble in my lifetime, etc., etc. Then 2 goals go in added time. First goes in from Sheringham. I think, oh shit. Oh well, it doesn't matter. I've got extra time. I'll be able to. Oh bloody hell, Solskjaer scored. Just about. I'm kind of sitting there with my eyes shut, thinking, I've got about 2 minutes to rewrite this. What am I going to say? What I hadn't noticed was the pissed up bloke in the had spotted that he was right by the press box, and he came down the steps punching the laptops of each journalist in turn, going, "Oh, what are you bastards going to write now?" So I hadn't noticed it. I hadn't seen him coming. Suddenly, my laptop spinning to the ground with a great big crack across it. Oh God! So I had to ring up and do the old. Thank God I'd sat next to that guy from the News of the World at QPR against Chelsea and extemporise on the spot. Goodness knows what rubbish I gave, but anyway, there we go. It went on the front page of the Guardian. Fortunately, it was the first. Fortunately, it was the first edition, so probably only went to Devon and Cornwall. I can only apologise to readers in Devon and Cornwall.
I'm absolutely fascinated to know what is going through your mind, both professionally and personally, because professionally, you are probably faced with something that really is going to be one of the biggest challenges you may be facing in your career to turn that around at that time. While personally, seeing the greatest moment in the football team that you've devoted your life to's history, what is going through your mind? Can you even enjoy it?
Can you enjoy it? It's an interesting thing, that. I mean, the challenge is that moment was pretty desperate when my laptop broke because that bloke had punched it. I have to say that was pretty desperate. But I grabbed the phone and started talking, and the joy and delight became obvious as I was making my way through it. But yeah, it's an interesting one, this, because the deadlines are such when writing about an evening game that you've got to go on the. I was told by my first editor that the principal driving force of a journalist is usable copy on time. There's no point delivering something late. It's usable copy on time, and late evening matches always have that frisson about them. You've always got to deliver something fast and furious. And the adrenaline takes over in that case. I mean, all through that season, it was like that because there were these last minute turnarounds. But yeah, that was a difficult, difficult night. It was funny actually because after the game, I found myself. This is about 3 a.m. I found myself in the bar of a hotel, and I'm chatting with this United fan woman I know who's there. She was there with her partner, and we're chatting away. And I went down to the loo, which was downstairs, and I realised that the United party was taking place there. The post-match banquet. So I come back upstairs and I say, "You never guess what? The post-match banquet goes there." And this woman goes, "Come on, then we're going to go to it." So me and her partner go into the banquet, and we just walk straight in, and we're walking around, taking it all in and stuff like that. And I noticed that when we're going around on the tables, they've got these specially printed menus with Manchester United champions of Europe, treble winners, these lovely souvenir menus, and she's just picking them up and shoving them down the front of her trousers. So security has spotted this and quickly realizes we shouldn't be there, and we get kicked out by that strange bloke Ned Kelly, who used to run United security. And as we're going, he says to my friend, "And madam, I think you've got something that belongs to Manchester United," and puts his hand down the front of her trousers to pull these menus out. But funnily enough, we get back upstairs. I said, "Bloody hell, that was a bit rough." And she goes, "Don't worry, I put one down the back," and pulls out the menu.
And that will be in a frame somewhere, I'm sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. Coming back to your book, it ends at the time with Manchester City securing the Premier League title in the most dramatic fashion imaginable before Fergie and Manchester United go on to win their 20th title. Now, while your postscript in the book does query the potential of power shifts, I don't think many would have predicted it would be the last Premier League to be lifted at Old Trafford in at least a decade. As we record this in the week between legs 2 and 3 of Manchester City's potential treble, and at least matching the achievements of Fergie's 99 side, I mean, from a professional and personal point of view, what do Man United need to do to return to those former glories?
It's very simple, Carl. The Glazers have got to go. I mean, it's a body rots from the head, and they've been rotting Manchester United. They took over in 2005 from this very progressive, organised PLC who were developing the club, developing the training ground, and so on. And the similarity with the water companies is very interesting. If you look at the way the water companies have fared since privatization, basically they've been bought using reverse takeovers in the same way that the Glazers did, lumping debt onto companies by American hedge funds. And they've got a captive audience, captive market. They've got existing infrastructure. You don't invest in the infrastructure and you just take the dividends. And the Glazers have been doing that. And that is the reason for decline. Sure, when Fergie was around, he was papering over the cracks. But once he went, they made some catastrophic decisions. One of the worst was to replace David Gill as CEO with Ed Woodward. Very poor choices of managers. And they could have got Guardiola. They could have got Klopp. They messed up both approaches to both men. I think they finally got one, by the way. I think Erik ten Hag is the man. But he can't plan for the what's coming in the transfer market because the Glazers have put the club up for sale. They can't even sell it properly. This kind of dragging of their feet. Get out. Let someone in who can run the place properly. We don't need a sugar daddy. We just need someone who can run the place properly. Give Erik ten Hag the prospects. And I think United, they're the biggest club in the country. They've got the biggest fan base. They've got the income. They can match City. But they've got to do it centre. They've got to run the place properly, like City is run, and then they'll match. And people say it'll take 5-10 years. I'm not sure about that. I think Ten Hag could pick it up quicker than that. And if Guardiola, when he finally wins the Champions League, decides, okay, I've done it, I'm going to move on. I don't want to be in charge of having to rebuild a side, then I think City will be in difficulty. So, well, not difficult, relative difficulty. So, I mean, the thing about it is, I don't think anybody, when I wrote that book, could have thought that the Premier League was going to be dominated by Manchester City. Even when Mancini won the league, they looked a very good side, but they didn't look the kind of machine-like operation they are now.
So much has happened in that 10 years, and it's remarkable actually to read the book where it's left and actually reflect on what's happened in that
maybe what you're saying, Carl, is you need to write a new bloody version of this. This needs updating rapidly.
I am ready for book 2, Jim. I'm 100% ready. There's probably been at least another 10 matches for you to
Well, Brentford 3, Liverpool 3. It's got to be one of them.
So the fifth and final match to select for your deserted island is an international match you take with you to watch forever. What have you gone for?
I've gone for quite a recent one, Carl. I've gone for England against Denmark, the semi-final of the Euros at Wembley. I was reporting on that, and I actually got the feeling during that game that England were finally going to do it. There was a cohesion about them. There was a tactical plan, and there were great players. And I thought we were going to do it. And then, of course, they fell at the final hurdle of the penalty shootout against Italy. That was an interesting one. I tell you what, that was an interesting one. Having to send a piece on the final whistle after penalties, because there were two completely different stories. Penalty shootout, the final penalty goes in and it's glory, glory, glory. Final penalty is missed, as it was by poor old Bukayo Saka, and it's misery, misery, misery. And the only way to do that was actually to write both and then press the button on the one that happened. So I spent much of the added time in that game writing one version or the other, because I knew what was going to happen. And there's quite a sizable gap between final whistle and the start of penalties to do that. But that semi-final, England-Denmark, particularly as Denmark, because of the whole Christian Eriksen heart attack business, thought that they were destined to it and that momentum was on their side. And for England to beat them, I really did think how wrong I was. I really did think, we're going to be the champions. Finally, I'm going to see live England lift the trophy. And it was great. It was a great moment. I've seen some miserable England matches, by the way, including England-Algeria in the 2010 World Cup, a 0-0 draw of utter misery.
These are the good times that then reward you. I mean, the atmosphere after that game, they're probably the only two times you would be able to compare it to will be Euro 96 and the World Cup in 66. What was the atmosphere like in that stadium at the full-time whistle as all those players were celebrating and the music was playing? It must have been incredible to have been in the stadium to experience that.
Yes, it was. And remember, it was sort of, we were coming out of COVID, so it wasn't they didn't allow the stadium to be full. I think there were about 40,000 in an 80,000 seat stadium, and then they upped it to 60,000 for the final. Although there was about 120,000 in there, but that's a different story. But it was a wonderful atmosphere, and there was a kind of togetherness. And what I love about what Gareth Southgate has done for England is that I remember in 2016 seeing England lose to Iceland, and you got the feeling that the England players couldn't, they wanted to get out of that competition. They couldn't wait. The shirt was a burden. They wanted to throw it off and play for their clubs again. Whereas those lads, Pickford, Kane, Grealish, Rashford, those lads, they want to play for England. They love it. They love being together. They love the whole process, and that's down to Gareth Southgate. He has completely changed that negative culture and made it a really, really happy. And it was happy. That's what it was. And you can't say watching England has brought much happiness in the past 20 years or so. It was just so happy. Everyone singing along "Sweet Caroline" on the pitch and in the stands. It was great. God, sorry, Carl. I've just said singing "Sweet Caroline" was great. I'll take that back. Despite singing "Sweet Caroline," it was great.
It will be forever burnt into that moment, won't it? I'm fascinated by the process of having to write the two copies. Does that successful copy, or let's say the copy that you don't use, does that go into the recycle bin forevermore? Is there an archive there somewhere?
I suppose it is. I suppose it must be on my computer somewhere. But yeah, no, yes, it goes away. Ferguson, interestingly, it is alleged, and I don't know if this is true or an apocryphal story, because some of the reporters had earlier deadlines for the '99 Champions League, and the first editions would have had United have lost, blah 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 blah. And I think it is said that Ferguson has those copies as a stick to beat the journalists with.
I'm sure he does somewhere. Okay. Well, we've already mentioned your Premier League history. Is a fantastic book, and it really, really stands up as those first 21 years of the Premier League era. So I'd highly recommend that to anyone listening.
Thanks.
Another one of your books I absolutely love and recommend to anyone who listen is "You Win Nothing with Kids," which charted your accidental and at times slightly reluctant journey coaching your son's junior football team all the way through to his late teens. Now, there are some wonderful moments in that book where you ask some of football's most iconic managers for advice for your team, and actually while driving to interviews, your own tactics for the weekend are playing on your own mind. What pearls of wisdom did you get from some of football's greatest minds that other grassroots coaches might be able to recycle for themselves?
I'll tell you one that was really, really interesting and helpful, and it was Eric Harrison, who was the guy behind the class of '92. He was the youth team coach at Manchester United, and I met him around the time I was coaching the boys. And I said, "What tip would you give, Eric?" And he gave me what seemed like the most prosaic tip you could imagine. He said, "Do you have lines painted on the pitch that you train on?" So I said, "Yeah." He said, "Get the kids to stand one end, two of them stand either end of the line and just kick the ball along the line so they learn how to pass straight." I thought, really? I did it, but it really worked. The other one was Arsene Wenger. Brilliant piece of advice from Arsene Wenger, which is never shout at the boys. Encourage them, but never shout at them. If you've got a criticism, wait until after the game or half time to deliver it. Do not shout it from the touchline. And I think for any youth team coach, that is the best piece of advice, because I've seen it. At junior matches. It gets so fraught. You've got a mum shouting, "Pass it." You've got granddad saying, "Hoof it." You've got dad shouting, "Dribble it." You've got the coach saying, "Drop back." The kid's standing there going, "I don't know what to do." Much better is to leave it to them to make the decision about what to do. If it's the wrong decision, tell them afterwards. Say, when you were going down the line, maybe you should have cut inside, or maybe you should have passed it inside to the other guy. I thought that was a really, really smart bit of advice. But of course, when they score, cheer, encourage them. but don't ever give advice from the touchline, verbal advice. When they're in possession, when the opposition is in possession, you can say, yeah, drop back, lads. Yeah, defense, come as a line. But when they're in possession, don't confuse them.
Wow, brilliant advice, and as you say, simple but really effective. Yeah, fantastic. And who better to get your tips from than Arsene Wenger? So, on your deserted island, we're going to give you the chance of redemption. We're going to offer you the chance for a current or former Premier League player to rescue you. However, there is a caveat: if the rescue mission fails, you will be stuck with this player for all eternity. With that in mind, who's the player that you would go for?
It's going to be a United player, and it's going to be Eric Cantona. And I thought it might. I did consider, obviously not Gary Neville, because he would just talk you to death. I did consider Roy Keane, and that's partly because when Roy Keane did his autobiography that he wrote recently, they asked me if I would chair a couple of live events. And we did one at Old Trafford Cricket Ground in the corporate hospitality suite there. 800 people turned up. And Roddy Doyle, who actually did the writing, and me and Roy did a show for these people. Anyway, in the green room beforehand, someone comes around and says, what would you like to drink? And I said, I'll have a Diet Coke, please. And King goes, fucking Diet Coke, fuck off. I went, oh, sorry, Roy. He goes, oh, I'm sorry. It just reminds me. Anyone orders a Diet Coke, it just reminds me. And he told me this story about when he was at United in his early days. At the end of the season, he used to go home to Cork and have a real bender, go on a right old 24-hour binge. And he was on one, and it was about 5 in the morning, and it was his round in the pub. And there's a whole load of people there. Some he knew, some were old mates, some were just hangers on. About 20 people. All right, what do you want? A pint of Guinness, double scotch, bloody. He points at this bloke and he goes, what do you want? Diet Coke, please. And King goes, why? You've had about 20 pints. What are you talking about, a Diet Coke? He goes, I've got to go to work in an hour. And I need to sober up. And King goes, you've had 20 pints. Diet Coke's not a magic bullet. It's not going to sober you up. Don't be ridiculous. And he says, you're not going to get sober. Anyway, what do you do for a job? And the bloke says, I drive the school bus. And Keane said every time anyone asked him for a Diet, or he heard someone asking for a Diet Coke, it reminded him of that moment. And it made me realise Roy Keane is such good company. He's so funny. He is, he's just really funny. So he'd be great. But obviously I've got to go for Cantona because, his godlike presence, he'd rescue me. He'd create something to get me out.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He certainly has that aura about him. But it's good to know that Roy Keane is as good value behind the scenes as he appears to be to all of us watching at home. Now, on this podcast, we do try and reflect that the Premier League has been divisive. There are perhaps as many people who say it's ruined football as revolutionised it. And we've touched on one or two of the things that have happened, particularly over the last decade or so since your book was published. Where do you stand on the positives and the negatives of the Premier League era after 30 plus years?
I think the positives are in the product. The stadiums are magnificent. It's much more comfortable to watch. Mind you, that's probably just an expression of aging. But the pitches are brilliant. The players are great. They're fitter. They're sharper. They're faster. I think the product is undeniably great and better than it ever was. I think there are issues. I think I fear a kind of, this sounds like the old romantic, but I do fear a kind of detachment from the roots of the game. And by that, I mean, I think that football clubs are huge cultural assets within their communities. And, sure, City have come in and built wonderful new training grounds, and they're building a fantastic indoor arena and all those kind of things, committed to the community. But what I mean by that is, I don't think that when it comes to it, I don't think that John Henry at Liverpool or Joel Glazer at Manchester United or Todd Burley at Chelsea really cares a damn about the rest of the football pyramid in England. They're just interested in the projection of their club around the world. And I think that has a really devastating knock-on effect. The other thing that I find slightly dispiriting about it is the manner in which clubs in the Championship, instead of enjoying the Championship, it's just the desperation to get up, and they sometimes bust themselves in the process of trying to get up, trying to, reach the Holy Grail. I think it's distorted the competition down below. That said, attendances are going up everywhere. We've just had the National League's highest ever attendances. The 5th tier of English football gets higher attendances than anywhere else in the world. The Spanish 5th tier is attended by a man and a dog. We were getting 10,000 at Wrexham this season, 12,000 at Notts County. Quite remarkable. And that's all the way through. League Two's got bigger attendances than ever. League One. So maybe people, having been priced out of the Premier League, watch it on the telly and then go round the corner. And that's not a bad thing, is it?
Yeah, so football pyramid may have some of that trickle down effect of the ever growing expense it is to watch Premier League football.
Yeah, I mean it is not cheap. I mean it is ludicrously expensive. I wonder what Luton will do. That'll be interesting. I'm kind of looking forward to Luton because they are a sort of antidote to the Premier League. They've got a stadium that is held together by sellotape. Only seats 10,000. It'd be really interesting to see how they fare. I hope they don't get spat out straight away. I hope they manage to cling on for a couple of seasons. That'd be great.
And so we're going to give you the chance to strike a game from the Premier League records. You can put a game in Room 101 forevermore. Which game would you choose?
I think you know what I'm going to say. 5th of March, 2023 at Anfield. Can't remember the score, but it was pretty unpleasant. 7-0 to Liverpool. Yes, that's got to go.
Yeah. I'll never forget that actually, because it was my dad's birthday and we were sat in a restaurant and checked my phone and saw the score. So I didn't actually watch it live, but an astonishing match. So that's gone. That's gone.
Thank you.
Okay. And finally, we're going to give you a football to take with you to your deserted island and give you the opportunity to recreate a Premier League goal forevermore. Which one would you attempt?
Sadly, I can't do the Rooney one because you need someone to cross it, don't you? And I haven't asked. I suppose Eric Cantona could do it, but he's going to rescue me. He's not going to be left on the island, and I certainly don't want Nanny with me to cross it. It's also a Rooney goal, but it was a free kick, which you can practice. And it was 2017 when he was right in the twilight of his career. Game against Stoke, last second of probably his. I think it may well have been his last game for United, and United were losing, and that shows that tells you something, doesn't it? How far United have sunk, losing to Stoke, and Rooney took a free kick and bent it into the far corner. 250th goal for Manchester United, overtook Bobby Charlton with it, and a brilliant free kick. So I'm going for that one.
Fantastic. Well, Jim, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I mean, I'm sure many people listening and watching will be familiar with your writing, but reminders, Fighting Talk, The Telegraph, you've got a back catalogue of wonderful books. Tell us a little bit more about some of those things.
I've just written a book with Phil McNulty at the BBC about the Manchester United-Liverpool rivalry called Red on Red. And Phil's from Liverpool, I'm from Manchester, so we're sort of, balancing it out. So whichever persuasion you're of, either Liverpool or Manchester United, there's a lot to enjoy in that book. Just talking to everyone who's involved in the rivalry was great fun. So there's that one.
Fantastic. Well, Jim, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for giving up your time today to share your Desert Island matches.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
So that was Jim White. What a fantastic guest, a dream guest for me, to be perfectly honest with you. I have read Jim's books and some of the millions of words that he's committed to print over the years during his fantastic career. He's such a down-to-earth, approachable guy. He's been really, really supportive of the show and other things as well that I've done in the past. So it was a real pleasure to get Jim on. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And if you are a Manchester United fan or a Liverpool fan in particular, Red on Red sounds like quite the read. Again, I think that may have been committed to print just before Liverpool won 7-0, much to Jim's pleasure. If you are new to the show, or even if you're not, all the links you need to follow us are in the description. I'd really appreciate it if you could leave me a review as well. That really helps to find new audiences. You can support the show on buymeacoffee.com. That link is also in the description. But generally speaking, if you can just share this with other football fans who you think might enjoy it, I would really appreciate it. There's a huge back catalogue now, over 40 episodes, including Clive Tilsley, Ashley Ward, Danny Wilson, Josh Pugh. We've had some fantastic comedians on as well. Go and have a look if you are new to the show. So next week's show is my chat with author James Green. James has written a book all about alternative realities. What if Southgate got subbed? That and around about 20 other scenarios are all broken down in his great new book. We look at one or two of them and rewrite football history. That will be next week's show, so please do come back for James Green. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate you coming along and enjoying the show. And I will see you back here next week for some alternative realities with James Green. See you then.